I'm still here surfing the remains of 2024, trying to catch up on as many releases as I can. And one that I was dying to see that I just kept missing was Luca Guadagnino's second film of 2024, Queer. This is a film that I was so excited to finally check out. And now that I have plenty of thoughts to share with you guys about this one. So let's get into it. So Queer is pretty much a really brutal depiction of loneliness following Daniel Craig's Lee as he begins to enter a relationship with a man named Eugene, played by Drew Starkey. Both these performers do a wonderful job. Daniel Craig has consistently been in awards conversation all year, unfortunately missing that Oscar nomination. But that does not take away from his work here. It was quite a brave performance, to be honest with you, and I think he does a tremendous job. And Drew Starkey as well is utterly fantastic too. They fully embrace Luca Guadagnino's and William Burroughs' vision for this story and are willing to go to some pretty wild and wacky places, because it does feel like with both of Luca Guadagnino's two 2024 films, it almost feels like a one for you, one for me scenario, where Challenges was definitely the crowd pleaser that got everyone really excited. And then Queer is something a little bit more experimental and strange, and definitely something that has a slightly more pessimistic and just hopeless tone to it that does really make you feel pretty depressed by the end of this film. This thing is structured quite clearly with 3 acts and an epilogue. All 3 acts are very different from one another. However, because they have a very consistent thematic undertone and some clear intentions throughout, it does feel like they are connected enough. However, I do have issues with the way that this story has unfolded. I don't think this film is as perfect as what I was hoping it to be, and ultimately it does feel messy and at times a little bit disappointing, considering Luca Guadagnino is a wonderful filmmaker who makes so many great films that I'm always excited for. However, a bad Luca Guadagnino movie to me is still a pretty good movie. A lot of comparisons to Suspiria with this film, and sure, I could see some of that in this movie, but to me it almost feels like a culmination of Guadagnino's work. I see a little bit of Call Me By Your Name in here. I do see a little bit of Challenges in here. I do see Suspiria in here. So I think there are just many different influences here in this very strange story, and I think if anyone was going to adapt it, Luca Guadagnino is probably the best filmmaker that you could get for this. However, I do think that it could be an issue with the source material or the way that it was visualized, but there are just so many things that hold me back from fully connecting with these characters, that give me some emotional resonance with the characters and certain moments of significance, that keep this at arm's length from me really loving this and being passionate about it, despite the fact that I do like it overall and do think it is a good movie. For example, I think the first act of this movie, I was thinking this was a 5-star masterpiece. I thought this was filled with masterful visual decisions and real tender moments. I liked the way that particular moments of longing were visualized in this film, with this shadowy hand, or Daniel Craig's Lee reaching out even though he's not really doing that. The way that was visualized was absolutely stunning and wasn't the most outrageous, crazy choice, but it is a nice, subtle thing that is thrown in that communicates everything it needs to the audience. I thought moments like that were absolutely beautiful, and I think certain musical moments, I think the score from Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross is wonderful. I mean, they're some of the best in the business, and they turn out another great score here. The soundtrack is wonderful. There's a particular moment where there's a Nirvana needle drop, and it was probably my favorite moment in this entire movie, and a really beautiful introduction to Drew Starkey's Eugene. The way that the slow motion is utilized, the soundtrack, the looks between these two characters, also meaningful and playing such an integral part to setting up this relationship and the longing that Lee has for Eugene. However, I found that as the film progresses, it does get more abstract, and I don't have a particular objection to utilizing an abstract narrative to communicate it. You know, in the most appropriate circumstances, it can definitely work in some really beautiful ways. However, I don't think Queer quite works like that because I don't think it plays to Luca Guadagnino's strengths as a filmmaker. I think as the film gets more abstract and more psychedelic, it kind of falls apart a little bit, and I think it puts you more at arm's length with these characters than what you were really intending to in the beginning of this film. It definitely ties more into the themes of loneliness and longing, as well as a certain jealousy that Lee has towards Eugene because he's a younger man who seems confident, especially in his sexuality and who he is, and is able to move on from particular relationships, while Lee is someone that plays a part as a really confident man that is able to sweet talk many men into having sexual relationships. However, when it comes to having a meaningful relationship, to finding his purpose in this world, to being able to just fit in, he has struggled immensely, and underneath the surface, he's a really broken man who struggles with drug addiction. And I think as we get more and more of those darker themes, I actually think Luca Guadagnino loses a real grip on this narrative and what makes it so moving, because there's so many strange abstract visual choices that feel more like a filmmaker showing off rather than really digging into the crux of these characters and what makes them so compelling. I think as more and more of these stylistic choices are utilized, I believe it will test a lot of the audience's patience. It definitely tested my patience, and I think I was willing to be as forgiving as possible because I wanted nothing but the best for this movie, and I loved so many moments for it that I was dying to say to you guys, this is a 5-star masterpiece and you need to go see it. That is what I wanted for this movie, but it just doesn't quite get there for me. However, I do think it does commit to its vision 100%, so I do have credit for someone having the balls to do something like that, and Luca Guadagnino is able to do that. And once again, I don't know where it is more of a weakness of Luca Guadagnino's or the narrative that is provided from this book from Burroughs. However, it is the filmmaker's decision to adapt this novel and decide what works best for film. And yeah, there's just moments here where it just doesn't quite work like it should. I think because sometimes these acts are so distinct from each other and the way that this film progresses, I do feel like the goal of these characters and this central relationship and the way that progresses is almost unclear at times and becomes almost obtuse and frustrating because it can shift so drastically and introduce such key moments for these characters far too late into the film, where I've kind of built an idea of these characters in my head, and it's not like a twist or something where it just kind of makes sense and I'm on board with it. It's not smartly done, it's just introduced and it feels a little jarring. And I think there are certain things you could have done to make these drastic changes within these characters and revelations as to who they really are feel a little bit more satisfying and earned overall. Technically, I do think the film is stunning. I think the cinematography and the editing is really at a high level. You cannot deny the production quality here. And I think it is a stunning movie to look at. Luca Guadagnino is no slouch as a director. He has a clear vision here, and I can really appreciate that. And as I said, I can enjoy a lot of this, but I think each act is weaker than the last. I think the first act is the best. Second act, it's a little bit more mixed, and then the third act, it still has its moments, and I can appreciate what it's going for, but it's just not hitting me in the right notes. And then the epilogue as well feels like it provides almost a cliched ending that I've seen in a lot of art house movies, and I was like, oh, we're kind of going there again. It is a bit disappointing when a film like this presents its relationship and key themes in such a unique way visually. I feel like I've spent more time criticizing this movie than praising it, but believe me, I do like this movie. I actually would give this a positive review, but it's not as high as what I wanted it to be. But as a score, I'm going to give Queer a 3.5 out of 5 because I think it is worth watching. I do like, in a sense, what it's going for, and I can see all the pieces fit together in a way where I could really get on board with this movie. I think, once again, those performances from Daniel Craig and Drew Starkey are outstanding. I think some of what Luca Guadagnino is doing is incredible, and I just wish it had dived into more of those elements that I really loved rather than going kind of off a cliff in a sense. Now, I think for some of you, you might prefer the more abstract nature to it and tell me that I'm wrong, and that's fine because I do think Queer is a work of art and up for your interpretation and your own life experiences and how you can project that onto these characters. I think there is a lot of beauty in that, and that is why I'm recommending this movie, because it's competently made, it's well done, and it is one that, even though I'm giving it 3.5 stars, it is a film that I would like to revisit, and perhaps down the road, I might end up loving this movie as I think about these themes and this imagery a little more. And those are my thoughts towards Queer. If you've seen the movie, let me know what you think about it in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this movie, and what do you think about Luca Guadagnino's filmography as a whole? I'm a huge fan and will continue to be a fan, and I cannot wait to see whatever he does next. Let me know your favorite Luca Guadagnino movie in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.